Hello everybody, this is my 39th review of films to come out in 2025, and today we are talking about Sorry Baby. This stars Ava Victor, who is also the director and the writer, which is a pretty impressive feat on their part. Especially because, as far as I can tell, this is the start of their career as both a writer and a director. And according to IMDb, the only thing they've ever acted in is 4 episodes of a TV show called Ava vs. Anxiety, which I believe is just a Comedy Central, web series. So no matter what I think of this film, I think this is all very, very impressive. But what did I think about it? Would I recommend Sorry Baby? This is going to be a very unpopular take, but honestly, I don't really think so. I really was not crazy about this. There are things I loved about this movie, but a lot of them I felt like I was barely able to appreciate because there's other aspects that were just kind of annoying or underwhelming to me. And so they kind of got in the way or just distracted me from the things I liked about it. But please, don't let me stop you if you're interested in seeing this, because most people seem to be loving it. People from the film festival scene seem to be loving this. The 3 people I saw the movie with really enjoyed it a lot more than I did. Everybody I follow on Letterboxd pretty much gave this a great review and a really high score. Chances are you might love this, and I think it's a great thing to support up-and-coming directors and writers and smaller movies in general. And I am genuinely interested to see what Ava Victor makes next. I think they are not going to be affected by this review at all, but I'm just saying, I'd like this movie to be a success. I have nothing against it. And as I said, even I, the contrarian, felt like there were elements that were really good about Sorry Baby. The aspect of the movie I liked the most was a very important one for it to work, which was the acting from the 2 leads. Ava Victor's acting I thought was very good in this movie, and Naomi Ackie, who I recently talked about because she was in Mickey 17, I thought she was even better. Her performance felt very grounded and real in a way I really liked. There were some dramatic scenes that I thought worked really well. There was one scene where the main character was doing jury duty, and I thought it worked well both in terms of comedy and drama. The dramatic side of the scene felt very real, and the comedy element, which involved what she wrote down on a piece of paper, made me laugh a lot. That was the biggest laugh in the movie for me. In general, I thought the cinematographer did a very good job. I thought the shots were well framed and they were very, crystal clear at all times. I felt like there was a few pretty memorable lines in the movie, pretty good dialogue writing overall, even though I will have some issues that I'll talk about in terms of that later. There are some really interesting choices in terms of editing and cinematography that I liked in terms of how they show off what the character is thinking. And they did it in a way that I thought was clever because there's no dialogue or anything. It's completely visual communication, but it feels very internal to the character. There's one scene in a bathroom that I think was my favorite in terms of this stuff. The scene involves 2 characters talking to each other, but the camera stays on one of them the entire time pretty much. You don't see a lot of reactions from the other character, and I liked that because I feel like what was going on in the scene was that the character was so in their head that they were not making eye contact. They weren't thinking about the other person that much. They were kind of just dumping what they were thinking about. And so the fact that we never see them because she's not making eye contact with the character makes a lot of sense. And I really loved that. All right, now let's get into the stuff I did not like about this movie. If there's one word I would use to describe the film overall, I would say it was unconfident. And some people may be offended by that categorization on my part because this movie tackles a very serious subject and it does it in a very emotional and vulnerable type of way. I really don't think it's unconfident at all to explore this subject matter. I'm specifically talking about some choices in terms of how it's executed. There's one character that basically disappears from the movie halfway through, and it's done in a way that's not unrealistic and does kind of make sense for what's going on with the main character internally, but personally, I just found it unsatisfying that we never saw that character again. I wanted to see that character explored a little more because I was genuinely curious to learn more about them after what happens in the movie, but we don't get that. And again, I understand why, I understand the reasoning behind that choice, but personally, I just kind of saw it as the movie being not confident enough to show that character's reaction to the situation. I don't want to spoil the movie. It's not like I liked the character at all, obviously. I was just kind of interested in them, and hopefully you get what I mean by this. There's a lot of just choices in terms of how shots are edited when we cut, where you don't get to see characters' reactions to certain things in a way that I didn't feel like serviced the movie at all, and just kind of felt like maybe they thought the actors' reactions to these things were not realistic enough or something. And I feel like in many parts of this movie, the aspect it's the most unconfident in is being subtle. I felt like there was a lot of points where it just didn't trust the audience to understand things without over-explaining them. Those shots that I mentioned earlier that were really great at exploring the characters' like internal thoughts without saying anything, were great in theory a lot of the times, but sometimes I felt like they would just go on too long. They would just stay on a shot for so long, like, do you get it? Do you get what the character is thinking here? And I felt like, yeah, I understand what you're trying to communicate, okay, let's move on now. Perhaps the movie was just going for a slower, more meditative pace, and it wasn't trying to over-explain things, it wasn't trying to be overly obvious, but that's just how I felt as a viewer. There are also jokes that I felt like were too obvious and over-explained, serious dialogue that I felt was unrealistic in terms of how directly the characters were kind of telling the audience how they felt. As I said, I really liked the performances by the two leads, but I don't think there was a single other performance in the movie I really cared for. I know a lot of people who are a fan of him, but I am really not a fan of Lucas Hedges as an actor. I don't think he does a terrible job with the character, but I think a lot of that comes from the fact that the movie is not demanding him to be very emotive. There's a lot of bit characters, I guess you'd call them, who are cartoonish in a way that's trying to be funny, and I just did not feel like it fit the realistic sides of this movie or the realistic main characters in the movie, and it just felt weird and didn't mesh. There's one scene with two women that work at a school, and I thought it was really bad, and I think most people are in agreement with me on that, even people who love the movie, that both from a comedic and a dramatic level, it just does not work in the intended way. There's one reoccurring character in this movie who is so open about their envy to another, and I just thought it was so cartoonish and so unrealistic, and if you just toned it down a couple notches, it would have worked really well. Because there are people in the real world I've met like that character. I think it's a funny idea in concept, but it just needed to be toned down a couple notches because the way it's written is just so obvious. As I think you're getting from this video, there's a side of this movie that's very serious and very heartfelt, and there's a side of it that's, you know, trying to be like quirky and funny, and they just did not mesh for me at all. There definitely are serious moments in this movie that did work, but there were only like 2 or 3 jokes in the entire movie that worked for me. This movie feels very Sundance Film Festival. There are very few film festivals that have like a very specific archetype in terms of the type of movies you'll see there. I mean, some kind of do, but I feel like Sundance in particular has a very specific type of movie you'll see. Stuff that's very character-focused, stuff that's kind of cheesy, inoffensive comedy, heartfelt dramas involving a small group of characters figuring out their lives. There's usually quiet sound design, usually a small town or a relatively small scale, a nice, pretty piano score, bright, kind of desaturated cinematography. Just all of those elements were in line with this movie in a way that I was rolling my eyes at a little bit. Not that any of those elements on their own or working together necessarily made the movie bad. You could make a great movie with all of those elements. It just felt like I've seen other movies that have all of these aspects and done it better. There's one scene with John Carroll Lynch, who you'll probably recognize from Fargo and Zodiac, and it's just so cheesy in that Sundance way of like, let me tell you a lesson about life that you can probably learn something from. I don't know, it just felt so cheesy. The movie is also going for that kind of mumblecore, deadpan acting, and again, I just feel like I've seen better movies in that category as well. Overall, I just didn't feel like this movie had that much of a voice or a personality, which definitely makes sense for a debut film, but still. I feel like when you're writing a movie, you usually either focus on specifically the characters, specifically the themes, or specifically the story. Like, there's usually one of those 3 elements that'll kind of give you a jumping off point. And this movie is very clearly focused on the characters specifically, which there's nothing wrong with. But I do feel like as a result, the structure of the story feels kind of unfocused and messy. There are many scenes that didn't really feel like they had that much of a point other than maybe showing character growth or having the character grow a little bit, but I don't know, I just feel like they need to be more involved in a story or something. To me, the choice of the point of the story to end the movie felt less meaningful and intentional the more I thought about it. It does wrap up stuff nicely from the start of the movie, but the start of the movie too just feels a little more drawn out than it needs to be. There's one scene in this movie that disturbed me in a way I was so not expecting. I watch a lot of disturbing movies. I've seen so many fucked up movies. This scene really got to me in a way that I don't think it did for most people, but personally, I was kind of pissed off at because of how much it disturbed me and upset me, and I feel like the point of the scene was to show like a bit of a change in the character, but it's not very clear, and it has no purpose in the rest of the movie, really. And the follow-up of that scene too, God, I just really didn't like the way they followed it up. The worst thing about this movie, in my opinion, is the score. I don't want to talk badly about the composer. I think in terms of composition, it's okay. Nothing, too memorable. There's a lot of it that definitely reminded me of other things. It actually reminded me a lot of the Sperm World soundtrack at a couple points. I'm not calling out, plagiarism or anything. I highly doubt it was even influenced by that, but just weirdly similar. It's pretty cliche sounding in a lot of aspects, but the thing I really hated about it was the sound of the recording. There were multiple moments where the theater speakers were buzzing because of the way the piano was recording, and there was just a lot of sounds that were in the mix that was weird. It was just a weird mix and a really weird recording job. I didn't notice it as much when listening to it again with headphones, but when testing it on speakers, there's definitely issues there that needed to be fixed real bad. It was just so distracting to me. I really was bothered by it. Maybe your setup, it won't be as big of a problem. I hoped that it was the theater's fault, but I really don't think it was. Here's one last really spicy take before we end this video off. I didn't really like the main character that much. I didn't hate her or anything, but I just found her very immature in a way that I did not find charming. I feel like maybe if we saw more sides of the character, I would have felt differently, but I just gotta be honest, I was not that into this protagonist. I want to go over something I talked about earlier a little bit about this movie not having enough of a voice or a style. I feel like this movie has a lot of similarities with Sundancey movies and mumblecore movies. I don't feel like there's nothing here. I feel like there is a voice. There's something here, but I just felt like it could have been so much more confident and stronger in terms of personality and directing. And it's just a bummer because I'm super critical of this movie, obviously, but I really, really wanted to like it more than I did. There's a lot of elements I really liked, and I mean, other than the recording buzz with the music, there's nothing I hated about the movie. I was just underwhelmed by the whole experience by the end, and that shouldn't be the takeaway. It's a very serious subject that this movie is tackling for a lot of its runtime, but I was just so, underwhelmed by the end, and I feel like if this movie did take different approaches with the style of the filmmaking, it would have stuck with me and hit home harder in a way that I would have loved. But sadly, that was just not my reaction. I'm happy if it was for you. I know it is for most people, but yeah, I'm gonna give this 2.5 stars out of 5. Tomorrow, I will make a review for The Bad Guys 2, so subscribe to see that. In the description, I will put a link to my Letterboxd list ranking all the movies I've seen of 2025 so far. Here is the ranking so far, and here is where Sorry Baby is placed. And there are the rest of the movies on my list that I've seen this year and made reviews for. Yay! Thank you for watching. I hope I didn't frustrate or upset too many of you with this take, but yes, comments and likes are very much appreciated. They help give me a boost in the algorithm. Very much appreciate it. So yeah, thank you for watching. That's all I gotta say about Sorry Baby. See ya.